He was the third child, a wonderful young man, always wanted to help people.
So we were both frantically trying to find our father. Eventually, we continued to call, and eventually I got somebody else at the law school who knew his schedule and said that he was not coming in that day.
No one, not only in my office, but around us, had any clue what happened.
A lot of that was getting ready to go overseas, training people to do that, coming back, teaching more people, going back again. It was kind of like a hectic life for a while.
So that morning I came in, it was a normal Tuesday morning, the sky was very blue. I got in and my assistant, Julie, said to me, hey, a plane hit one of the World Trade Center buildings.
The time is currently 8:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Exactly 21 years ago at the moment, millions of Americans were on their morning commutes, were preparing a cup of coffee to start the day, were looking at the latest baseball score, were going about their daily lives. Everything seemed normal. On the ground, life went on for the next 45 minutes. But over the skies of the northeastern United States, an attack had already begun that would forever change the world. At approximately 8:46 a.m. on September 11, 2001, American Airlines Flight 11 flew into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. What was initially seen as a tragic accident by many Americans was quickly forgotten as United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center at 9:03 a.m. America was under attack.
At 9:37 a.m., the concrete walls of the Pentagon were hit by American Airlines Flight 77, killing all 64 people on the aircraft and many more inside the building. Aware of the hijackings, passengers on United Airlines Flight 93 made it their mission to prevent yet another attack. The plane later crashed into the field of Somerset County, Pennsylvania. As the twin towers of the World Trade Center crumbled, as smoke filled the Pentagon and the skies of Washington, and as the fields of Somerset County, Pennsylvania lay in flames, millions of Americans remained glued to their televisions. Many attempted to get in touch with people they knew on the hijacked planes or in the attacked buildings. Some calls went unanswered. In total, at least 2,996 people from over 75 countries lost their lives on September 11th, 2001. As we take you through the next hour, you will hear from individuals who were on ground zero, who lost loved ones as a result of the attacks and were driven to write about their experiences and more. I'm Yao Bonsu.
And I'm Michael Richardson. The following material may be sensitive to some. Listener discretion is advised. Any thoughts or opinions expressed during this broadcast do not reflect those of WRHU, Hofstra University, and its Board of Trustees. All opposing opinions can be sent to programming at WRHU.org.
Everyone remembers where they were on 9/11, right? WRHU reporter Lucas Pino had the chance to speak with two people who shared their experiences on that day. One was a New York City fire commissioner, and the other worked at the World Trade Center.
Today marks the 21st anniversary of the 9/11 attacks of the World Trade Center. Every year, we look back and reflect on the thousands of people who were lost on that day. We also look back on the first responders who were there that day. One of those first responders was Tom Von Essen, who was the New York City Fire Commissioner at the time. He described his experiences on that day.
All right, so it was a beautiful day. I was on the East River Drive on my way to the office, and I got a call that a small plane crashed into the North Tower of the Trade Center. I was really close to it, so I got in there. I got there a couple of minutes. As I was walking in, to the right of me, about 15, 20 feet away, I guess, I heard this really loud thud.
He thought that thud was a small plane. However, it turned out to be something much worse than that.
And I walked into the building, and I was still a little thinking, like, wow, small plane. And when I get in there right away, the chiefs told me it was not a small plane, it was a commercial jet. It was up, past the 90th floor on the North Tower. And couldn't put the fire out above it because all the lines had been severed, and just was getting as many people out as they could, as quickly as they could.
A few minutes later, Von Essen had felt a vibration and then was told that the South Tower had just been hit.
The South Tower did get hit. It was much lower, was much better hit as far as trying to take the building down. So we tried to get everybody out of North Tower as fast as possible. Before we did that even, the South Tower fell.
Von Essen and his crew immediately started to evacuate civilians in and around the towers.
There was a record later on we found that 1,600 people had gone through the card reader up in the offices just in the North Tower. So we evacuated, almost all of those folks, and evacuated thousands of people from the subway stations and underneath the Trade Center. So, it could have been a lot worse if they hit that building later in the morning. There were a lot of people that were late for work that day that escaped the tragedy.
One of those people that escaped the tragedy was Michelle Nathan. At the time, she was the director of finance for Blue Cross Blue Shield, which was located in the North Tower. The babysitter who was taking care of her then 5-month-old son had quit the morning before, so she and her husband had to make a decision.
And I had to make a last-minute decision to say, oh my God, okay, so I couldn't get a babysitter to replace her until Wednesday. I'm going to go to work on Monday. I'm going to go to work today, and I'm going to stay home tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, we could both go to work because we have a new babysitter. So it was literally that decision as to the fact that I was just going to go to work Monday and stay home Tuesday, and 9/11 was a Tuesday, that literally kept me out of that building.
When she got the call about the tower being hit, she put on the news and saw the building she worked in shambles.
If you looked at the building, you'll see that there's it looks like 2 bands on each building, and those were like air vent floors. And I remember just looking and knowing that we were below the air vent floor and the planes had hit above that. Like, that was my first thing, like, oh my God, did that hit like my company? And I know our 10 floors were below that. It was surreal because that was somewhere that I worked every day. It was part of my daily life. I had been working there for years. And to know that, my entire company lost its entire headquarters.
At this time every year, Michelle Nathan goes back and reflects on how thankful she is to be alive following the unexpected situation that forced her to stay home on that day.
Just thinking about how that quick decision and how all the events, led to me being home. And it makes me think, I often joke with my younger son. I'm like, he wouldn't even be here if, God forbid, anything happened to me. It's like you go through your everyday, and it's been so long, but that day just weighs you down because you're forced to just, again, reflect. And I do always go back to that pivotal moment of deciding that I was going to go to work on Monday and stay home on Tuesday. And I just always think to that, like, wow, like, what caused me to do that, right? Like, just an innocent, quick, decision, and the massive implications of that quick decision kept me here. And
Tom Von Essen reflects and thinks about all the men he lost that day.
When I look back, I can't believe it's 21 years already, almost 22 years. Life goes on. Those who were fortunate enough to have good families, good mothers, able to overcome the tragic loss, and they moved on, but they'll always have that open wound in their heart, missing their fathers.
343 firefighters, 23 NYPD officers, and just under 3,000 total people died on that horrific day. It is a day that we will truly never forget. For WRHU, I'm Lucas Pino.
Every year, Hofstra holds a ceremony to remember the lives of the 27 members of the community who were lost on September 11th. The memorial takes place in front of a statue resembling a phoenix, where 27 flowers are given out to be placed on a wreath. Each flower bears the name of one of the individuals lost that day. One of those flowers read Joseph Hunter, a Hofstra student whose life was lost on that fateful day. Members of Joseph's family were present at the ceremony, including his mother, Bridget Hunter. She shared the story of her son and what the ceremony means to her 21 years after the passing of her beloved child.
Ms. Hunter, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about your son and your experiences on September 11th. I want to first start off by just asking you, can you tell our audience a bit about yourself?
Well, I'm an Irish immigrant, came to this country in 1958, got married, had 4 beautiful children, 2 girls, 2 boys, and my son that passed away in 9/11. He was the 3rd child, a very a wonderful young man, always wanted to help people, and he was very much involved with the underdog. Like if somebody, like there was this homeless man in our town here, and some of his friends one day went and they were teasing him, and he heard about it, so he called them up and he says, I would like you all, he says, to meet me at the schoolyard because I want to talk about something. And he looked at them and he said to them, he says, I understand you were not being very nice to this gentleman. And he says, if you ever try anything like that again, he says, or bother this man, he says, you have to answer to me. Because he says, now stay off, keep, mind your own business, do not interfere with him. So from that day on, they didn't. And he was very caring about people that were, not doing well in their lives, and he didn't want anybody harassing them in any shape or form. He was just one of those people that were just like himself and his brother would have a little argument in the house, and he would stand at the front door until they apologized to each other. He would not go out the door without saying, "Oh, come on, Sean, let's go out." No, let me go, he says. And Sean would say, all right, and then they give each other a hug, and he was gone. So he was just, and he loved children. He loved little children, and he was just a wonderful young man, just great guy. He also, I also lost a daughter 22 years before that in a car accident, and he definitely, we all, like I say, we all missed her. We miss him, and we miss them all now. My husband passed away 10 years ago, and but I have faith, and I have a good feeling that they're together, and that keeps me going, because if you have faith, you can really deal with anything, and this is where I get my my courage from, and I knowing that they are together, and in my mind I picture them being together and being happy, and it's wonderful. And when I also see signs that they're around me, and yesterday as we sat by the at Hofstra by the monument, a white butterfly flew out of the flower that was on display where we were putting the flowers. A white butterfly flew out of that, and it came right over to and flew off of my left shoulder. And I always compared my daughter with the white butterfly. And I always talk to the butterfly when I see it. I said, "Oh, Margaret, you're here. Thank you so much for visiting me." And this is how I live my life now. This is how I keep going. And I feel very good. I feel very good about it, because if you have faith, you have everything. And it's very important. So that's why I tell all young people, teach your children, teach your little ones about life and about everything that's going on, and they learn from it, and it's wonderful. And I had 4 wonderful children.
Now, if I may ask, do you recall your experiences on that tragic day 21 years ago?
Oh, I was at my daughter's house babysitting, and I happened to be folding laundry, and I turned on the TV. Oh, no. I got in the car in my driveway to go to my daughter's house, and it said that a plane had flown into the World Trade Center, and then the second plane, and in my heart and in my mind, I said, no, that's definitely not an accident. That was not an accident. So I continued on, and as the day went on, we realized he hadn't called home because my husband was here, and he hadn't called, even though we heard that he tried to call us. His captain said he tried to call us, and because the captain survived. And And then all day. And then when I came back from my daughter's house in the evening, I couldn't even come down my street. It was so full of people. People around and asking if we have any news, and people started gathering in my driveway, in my backyard, and very supportive, and they still are. There's a wonderful, wonderful group of people in South Hempstead that really very, very helpful and very supportive. And but 9/11, to me, it just happened last week. It's like it was last week. And not only that, my son knew. He always told me. He said, "Mom, you know, being a fireman, anything can happen at any time. You go to work in the morning, you may not come home." And I said, "Oh, you'll be fine." And when he got his gear and his boots, he had them here in the house, and I had them in the kitchen, and I just poured holy water on them to keep him safe. And because I felt that I had to do something, and it made me feel good to be able to do something. So, and the only thing that wasn't found, the only thing that was found was his helmet, and that's in the museum now. So we're very happy that we have that.
Now, you might have alluded to this earlier, but what did your son do for an occupation, and how old was and how young was he when he unfortunately lost his life?
My son went to Hofstra University for business management, and as he at a very young age, which was around 7, 8, we live around the corner from a firehouse, and every time he heard the sirens. That time, back then, they had a little tricycle was called a big wheel. And he would ride the big wheel from my house to the corner, and I'm chasing after him because he was going so fast he could have got out into the street, and the trucks are passing by, and it used to scare me. So I used to run like a son of a gun after him, trying to keep him from going too fast at the corner and going into the street. So, but this was his life, and when he became 8 years old, there was a friend in the neighborhood whose father was a fireman, and the father used to take his son and my son, and the sons became best friends, and he would take them to they have racing teams. They do this in teams from other places also, and it's a wonderful it's an absolutely wonderful sport, and they do it, and now they do it in memory of my son. They have call it Joe Hunter tournament, and they have that before July 4th every year, and we raise money and we help people in need and people who have children and they can't feed them and all this, and anywhere that we feel that they need money or they need something, we do pretty good, and we save that money and we send them checks. So, and also for the fire departments who will lose a member or anything, we're there for the family to help them out. And it does your heart good just to be able to help people, and because this was his life. He wanted more than anything to help people. So.
Now, you mentioned, you were at the ceremony yesterday that Hofstra holds every year to honor the 27 members of the community who passed, including your son. What does that ceremony mean to you?
Oh, it means, just to see his name on the wall there, just to see his name alone, I'm proud. It makes me very, very proud of him, and it means an awful lot to me. And even though right now I am a little handicapped, I can't drive as like I used to, so my grandson volunteered to take me because I don't want to miss any of this, what's going on. And like Sunday morning, we're going to be down at Point Lookout. They have a beautiful service there, and it means an awful lot to me that they are not forgotten. My main goal is that 9/11 is never forgotten, and that the young people will also know about it and what went on. And I think it's very important not ever let it die.
If I may, when September 11th rolls around every year, you might have alluded to this earlier, but does it still fill you with grief, or as time has gone on, has that grief transitioned into hope or faith or a different sort of virtue?
No, I'm not sad on those days. I am not. I am very upbeat. I'm amongst people. I make sure to get out of the house. I'm sure that I definitely call, what we do is we call the mothers of the other firefighters that we knew, that they knew, and we've gotten together every year, and this keeps us all. We have a wonderful time together, and we all feel. Some are very depressed, but I'm not. I just keep going and smile and laugh and whatever. You have to do that, because if I get there where I'm depressed every year, I'm only bringing myself down, and then I'm not winning. I am not winning. But I mean, there's not a day goes by, every single solitary day, that he's not with me, and I talk to him, I think about him, and and I feel very good about that. My last prayer at night is for him and the souls and all the other firemen and all the people that died in 9/11. And last thing at night and the first thing in the morning. So they're with us. They're with us all the time. They're with us. They're around us.
Tom Smoot served in the Army for over a decade and is the founder of the Lift and Shift Foundation. He speaks about his organization and how it changed following the September 11th attacks, as well as his challenges with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, you're the founder of the Lift and Shift Foundation. What is the goal of that foundation?
Yeah, so technically our mission statement is to advocate for veteran inclusion in science and technology through programs that educate and build confidence. Basically, there's a lot of hurdles. There's a lot of barriers that people place in the way of going into fields that look complicated or technical or hard. And in my experience, getting a degree in electrical engineering, it wasn't so much hard as much as, I just had to show up every day and pay attention and actually do the work.
Can you walk me through your experiences on September 11th, 2001?
Yeah, wow. That's been a long time since I've talked about my own experience on 9/11. But I mentioned I was actually in the Army Reserve, and I was stationed in Western New York. So it was just kind of surreal to me to be a resident of New York State and see how these things happen. I worked in a big manufacturing facility where we made houses indoors. Western New York's a lot of snow, a lot of things happen inside, and you put them together outside, so you don't spend so much time in the cold. But I went home that day. My ex-wife and I, we were on the phone all day with our units and our commanders and our bosses in the military, trying to figure out if we would end up coming to New York City to be assist with Ground Zero, all the undertaking that came with digging and cleaning up and all of that stuff. It was just kind of a surreal experience to have myself and my ex-wife both on our phones all day, just kind of like calling everybody and trying to figure out when we were going anywhere. We kind of knew we were going somewhere, but we didn't know where. We ended up getting married. We actually ran to the courthouse on September 14th because we had a toddler, and we wanted to make sure that we had all of our paperwork and our family care plan and all of that kind of stuff prepared, because we shortly, by the end of the day on 9/11, we knew we would be going somewhere. We just didn't know where.
Now, transitioning a bit towards your foundation, did 9/11 influence the foundation at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I ultimately, after 2 deployments, 2 years in Iraq, I came home, was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder myself, and that's how I left the military. I left the Army. All of that kind of pushed me to want my engineering degree, and to kind of say I'm not disabled. I'm not. I don't have a problem, and it led me to this idea that maybe there are other veterans who want to take that same step, but there's something stopping them. And I really, once I got to the point where I had my degree and I felt comfortable with where I was in life, I wanted to, I think it's cliche, but you kind of like lift people up to where you are when you get to a certain spot. And that's something that was just kind of instilled in me through the military and by the people that led me. So it just felt like the right thing to do to give back.
So you mentioned your experience with post-traumatic stress disorder. If I may, can you go a bit more into that?
Yeah, sure. I would actually like to point out some of the things that I ignored for quite a long time. I came home from my first deployment, and I would wake up in the middle of the night. I would check the doors in the house. I would wander around the house, just make sure things were secure. I felt unsafe, and I felt like I couldn't protect my family. There were all these weird things that I just assumed were like leftover, like mental things from being in a combat zone for so long, and I made a lot of excuses and a lot of decisions in my own mind about how that was working, and it turned out it was not like leftover stuff. It was actually post-traumatic stress disorder, but I resisted that label that comes with anything that says disorder or disability for so long, and I was so adamant that there was nothing wrong. It kind of like just got stuck in my head that I can deal with whatever it is, but it's not a problem, and ultimately that made things worse. And I think it's the hard part for everyone who experiences a trauma is how do you define the normal response, and then the kind of like response that is that you need help with. After 20 years, the 20-year anniversary of 9/11 was a very challenging time, because so many of us had who served, who wanted to protect the United States after something that felt like an attack. We were struggling with those memories anyway, and then on top of that was the kind of hasty retreat from Afghanistan to kind of close that 20-year war. I think that's something that a lot of people should be aware of now. Is that was very hard for a lot of us who served to kind of witness that all unfold, and I hear that from a handful of veterans now that this year is the 21st anniversary. It doesn't seem like it's as big a deal, but it's also the 1-year anniversary of us leaving Afghanistan, and that's something that is kind of still in the news cycles and hard for some veterans to process, because it makes people feel like they didn't fulfill their duty or their promise to people we served with, whether they're Americans in uniforms, our interpreters that may have had a lot of impact on our safety and our mission. It's just it's a challenge still to deal with, and I think people don't realize the impact as they kind of rant back and forth about the politics of all of that stuff over the last 20 years.
You are listening to a special WRHU broadcast in remembrance of the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks. A reminder that any thoughts or opinions expressed during this broadcast do not reflect those of WRHU, Hofstra University, and its Board of Trustees. All opposing opinions can be sent to programming at WRHU.org. We also spoke to WRHU General Manager John Mullen about his experience on September 11th. He shares a story about his time in radio and how the company he worked for at the time reacted to the events of that day. Hello everyone. Join with me today is WRHU's General Manager John Mullen to discuss his experiences on the day of September 11th. John, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you. So, starting off, can you walk me through your experiences that day 21 years ago?
So, 9/11/2001, I was the operations manager of WQCD-FM, CD 101.9 New York, and 98.7 FM, WRKS-FM New York. And we were located at 395 Hudson Street on the 7th floor. So that morning I came in, it was a normal Tuesday morning, the sky was very blue. I got in, and my assistant, Julie, said to me, hey, a plane hit one of the World Trade Center buildings. So we sent a reporter downtown. We did not know that it was a large plane. We thought it might have been a small plane. We sent a reporter downtown, and then events unfolded. And when we first learned of the first plane hitting, we had a syndicated morning show called the Tom Joyner Morning Show on 98.7, which came from Dallas, Texas, into our studio to our transmitter. So we had a local news director named Bob Slade, really good news director. And Bob broke into the Tom Joyner Morning Show locally at 98.7 and did an update. And as events unfolded, Bob eventually did more updates, and we ended up pulling the Tom Joyner Show completely off the air and going live and local. On the jazz station, we had many, many updates as well, CD 101.9. So throughout the day, it was just updating the public of what was happening. And events were, unfolding. And we also ran public service announcements telling people if they had any information to give, law enforcement a call or the FBI a call. The city of New York was looking for supplies, so we ran public service announcements looking for things like dry boots and dry clothes, because you had all these first responders, fighting fires and stuff and getting soaked with the hoses and stuff, so that they were looking for that. And I just remember having, we basically pulled all the music off of our radio stations, and we just gave full information, just updating information. We had sources like ABC News and Associated Press, and our normal music disc jockeys, instead of doing music shows, were now doing news shows, basically.
So you mentioned a lot of what you did at the station you were working at that time. Were you able to really process what was going on while you were in the moment working, or did that take a little longer?
Well, I had friends and family that worked in the building, so I was worried about them. The jazz station, CD 101.9, every Wednesday all summer, we did something called Jazz Wednesday on the plaza of the World Trade Center. So we interacted with people that worked there often. Just the preceding Wednesday, we were there. So, it was very surreal, because people that worked there. I rode the Long Island Railroad with people that worked at the World Trade Center, and it was just it was heartbreaking, really heartbreaking.
21 years later, what do you feel is the biggest impact of the events that September 11th had?
I hope there are measures in place in airport security and in the FBI and the CIA so that it never happens again. That is my hope, that there are mechanisms in place and people have learned to be skeptical and to be proactive to ensure that something on that scale or anything like it ever happens again, because it's heartbreaking. It affected so many families, so many people, so many lives. It changed so much, and I would hope that 21 years later we have come to a place where we can prevent that from happening again.
And how can communities such as Hofstra go about remembering the lives of those lost?
Well, I think there are a number of institutions and a number of ways that people are remembered. There's monuments at a lot of the local towns have monuments. Hofstra has things going on. The ceremonies, the saying of the names. I really believe that the saying of the names is very important because it personalizes the events of that day. And it makes you really, when you hear the names, those were real people with real families, with hopes, with wishes, with dreams, with lives. And I think the reading of the names is something that is very humbling and sobering. And I think it's very important to continue that tradition, to honor those and to remember those.
Now, out of curiosity, you mentioned you've worked in media for over 3 decades. Did you find that the September 11th attacks impacted the media industry, and if so, how?
I worked in radio, and in radio, the advantage that radio has over other forms of media is we're live and local. So for us at the radio station, within a minute of hearing about the first plane hitting, we were on the air interrupting the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and we were on the air on WQCD. The beauty of radio is the ability to be live and local, instantaneous. So, that is really what, it hasn't really changed. It's a constant, but it's a reason. The other thing that radio is very important is radio is free. You don't need to pay for cell service to get a radio signal. All you need is a free transistor radio or a free car radio, and you're able to listen to radio. So AM and FM radio, especially AM, because AM goes very far, multiple states, it's very important for AM and FM to be free, to give information, timely information. And I think that's vital. Apps are nice and cell phones are nice, but you're paying for those services. And I think that when things like 9/11 or a weather emergency or a severe thunderstorm or a hurricane or something like that, tornado, I think it's really important to have live, local AM and FM radio.
You are listening to a special WRHU broadcast in remembrance of the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks. Michael Hinkson is the author of the New York Times bestselling book Thunderdog, as well as the book Running with Roselle. Thunderdog tells us the story of how his dog, Roselle, helped him down 78 flights of stairs on the North Tower of the World Trade Center after it was attacked on 9/11. He tells his story about escaping the North Tower and why he believes it resonated with so many.
In 2001, I was working for a company, Quantum Corporation. I was the Mid-Atlantic region sales manager for that company, and we opened an office on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center in August of 2000. So I hired people. I also spent a lot of time doing something that most people would not do, which is literally walking around the World Trade Center, learning where everything was, learning all the rules and regulations about evacuations, what to do in emergencies, spending time learning where all offices were. The bottom line is not being able to rely on signs like most people would do. I needed to learn the stuff and build a map. And frankly, I wish more sighted people would do the same thing. You'd find yourselves in emergency situations a lot calmer. But the bottom line is I learned all of that. And so on September 11th, we were in our office. There were some guests because we were going to be doing some sales seminars, teaching our reseller partners how to sell our products, when suddenly the building literally began to tip. We heard a muffled kind of explosion, and the building tipped like a big spring fastened to the ground. If you take a spring of any sort, hold it with your left hand or your right hand, whichever is one of your hands anyway, and you hold it on a table and then push the top of it. That's what the tower did, because big buildings are flexible. They're made to buffet and flex in windstorms and the possibility that they could be hit by an airplane. But no one ever thought that a plane with 26,000 pounds of jet fuel would deliberately be crashed into the towers. That's what happened. Of course, people say to me all the time, well, of course, you didn't know what happened because you couldn't see it. And the problem is, what I deal with constantly then and now is that people don't understand blindness. Blindness is really not the problem I face. The lack of eyesight isn't the issue. The problem is what people think about being blind. The bottom line is, just because a person is blind, it doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to do stuff. Of course, I didn't know what happened because the airplane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. No one, not only in my office, but around us, had any clue what happened. And in fact, we didn't know, I and a colleague who went down the stairs with me didn't know for sure what happened until actually both towers had collapsed. When we were first feeling the building move and it got vertical again, then we got our guests to the stairs. My colleague David Frank took them to the stairs. And I told him, because I knew, don't let them take elevators. David had looked out the window and seen fire above us. And so I said, don't let them take elevators, because if fire gets into the elevator shafts, which as we learned later it did, then anyone in elevator cars is going to be burned or killed. So David got them to the stairs. He came back. We swept the offices. We went to the stairs and started down. And I began smelling an odor, and it took me about 4 floors to realize that what I was smelling were the fumes from burning jet fuel. I traveled a lot for my company, close to 100,000 miles a year. And it took me a while to realize in the World Trade Center, I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. And when I observed that to others, they said, yeah, you're right. We were trying to figure out what that was. We must have been hit by an airplane, but we didn't know details. And as I said, we didn't know it till later. So we went down and we got to the bottom. We got outside. Then we saw fire in Tower 2. We had no clue that something had happened to that tower as well. We didn't feel it on the stairs. So we walked over to Broadway and started walking north on Broadway, and we eventually got to Vesey Street, where we stopped for a moment because David said, I can see the fire real clearly in Tower 2, which wasn't now that far away from us, and he wanted to take pictures. And so he got out his camera. I tried to call my wife on the phone, and I had called her just after the building was struck saying we were leaving, something happened, and we didn't know what. And the media hadn't really figured it out yet, and the media hadn't interrupted their broadcasts to talk about it. I love to say I beat Charlie Gibson in Good Morning America by 8 minutes in calling my wife, but nobody gives me a Pulitzer Prize or credit for getting it first. But in any case, I did call her and told her that something happened. We got outside. I couldn't reach her on the phone because, as we learned, people were saying goodbye to loved ones, either people who were trapped up above where the planes hit, or people down below who were speaking to their people who were not going to make it out. And I put my phone away, and David put his camera away when a police officer yelled, "Get out of here, it's coming down." And we heard this rumble that became this literally deafening roar, which I describe as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear metal clattering and clacking and glass clinking and breaking, and then this white noise sound as Tower 2 collapsed straight down.
Having been in the position for roughly 1 year, Hofstra University President Susan Poser has presided over 2 remembrance ceremonies for the September 11th attacks. I was joined by WRHU reporter Cody Millar to sit down with Hofstra University President Poser. The following interview discusses her experiences 21 years ago, how the attacks resonated across the nation, how they affected her and her family, and more. Now, starting off, what do you recall from that day 21 years ago? What were your experiences?
So, of course, I recall that day very, very vividly. I was at the time a faculty member at the University of Nebraska College of Law, and I heard some people talking. There was a lot of noise outside of, in the hallways, and so I went into the faculty lounge where the television was on, and I saw the first World Trade Center building that had already been hit by the first airplane, and just stood there and watched that. I mean, there was a lot of faculty there at the time watching this, and we saw the second plane hit. And as I was standing there, I started to realize that my father, who at the time was himself a law professor at Brooklyn Law School, when on the days that he taught, he took the train to Brooklyn, which went through the World Trade Center stop. So when that sort of hit me, I ran out of there and I called him at home, and there was no answer. So I called his office, and there was no answer. So I called my brother, who was also turned out doing the same thing. I think he was living in New York at the time, but he may not have been. He may have been living in Florida, actually, at the time. So we were both frantically trying to find our father. My mother actually happened to be traveling in South Africa at the time, so we were not worried about her. Eventually, we continued to call, and eventually I got somebody else at the law school who knew his schedule and said that he was not coming in that day. So that was a relief. Then I called his home again and got my stepmother, who said that he had left for an eye doctor appointment and was on his way to the eye doctor appointment. So he just kept doing what he was doing, even though he knew what was going on. So I was very relieved about that. Eventually, we at the law school stopped the classes and put some televisions in some areas where students could watch them. My children were very young, and so I went to pick up my daughters at one daughter at preschool, I think it was at the time, and did that and brought her home, and was basically glued to the television as everybody was, and trying to understand what was happening.
Now, you mentioned that you have children of your own. How did you end up telling them about this attack?
Well, it was very complicated because I think in the school, and one was in preschool and one was in elementary school at the time. 2001, she would have been in about second grade. And, they kind of hid it from them at the school. And the younger one didn't really know exactly what was going on, although I can tell you a story about that. The older one, asked questions, and, we just said it was a bad person who did something and tried to really shield them, to be honest with you, about it. It was very hard to explain. But that was on a Tuesday. And on Friday, there was an event at the elementary school, which was called Fun Night. And they set up kind of a carnival in the playground or in the field, and had I think actually the fraternity and sorority kids from the University of Nebraska came over and set up little games for them to do. And as we were pulling out of the driveway, and we of course brought the younger one with us, who was probably 4, we were going down the driveway, and she very distinctly in the back seat said, Mommy, should we be going to Fun Night after what happened? So she didn't understand any of it. She was 4, but she had absorbed over that week that something really terrible had happened. And she had some sort of a moral quandary about going to Fun Night. Just remembered that. And it's a reminder that little kids, they may not talk all that much or tell you that much, but they're watching and they're observing, and they can see how you're feeling.
As a parent, what are your thoughts kind of going through your mind when that kind of event happens?
Well, there was no other kind of event like that one ever. So, it's a very tough thing because I was really overwhelmingly sad about it and upset about it. And it was my hometown. I mean, I grew up in the city. And I also spent, was speaking to people who I knew had kids in the city, maybe adult children, and had actually already offered to several of these families that they could just walk uptown and go stay at my father's on that day. I don't know that anyone did it, but we were sort of arranging those things to get people out of the downtown, to help anywhere we could help. My father actually then went down to donate blood eventually, and they weren't taking it because they didn't need it. Right. You either survived or you didn't survive for the most part. There were not huge numbers of injured people. But as a parent, your instinct is to shield the kids from it. My kids were young enough, I thought, that I was doing that. And when my daughter made that remark in the car, I realized I had not succeeded in that. Yeah.
Now you kind of talk about how you were chatting with your kids in the days following. But otherwise, do you remember, the days following that attack? Were you looking for anyone? Do you remember, the news reports?
I did not know anybody who died, at least that I know of. On 9/11, I knew that, like at Hofstra, there were people that had gone to my college that had been in the towers, and other sort of degrees of separation, but nobody personally. So I was not particularly looking for anybody. But I think everybody was kind of in shock. I don't really, I don't know. I certainly don't remember sort of thinking of somebody and saying, are they still alive? I just sort of had sorted that out pretty quickly, that I didn't ever hear of anybody. So I was lucky in that way.
Prior to your time at Hofstra, you worked at several educational institutions such as University of Nebraska-Lincoln and University of Illinois at Chicago. Do you notice a difference in the way different institutions mark the anniversary of the September 11th attacks, and how so?
Well, it's an interesting question because it's very much a question that comes from a New York or maybe an East Coast point of view. I'm pretty sure that the following year, the first year anniversary, there was something, and I was still at the University of Nebraska at that time. After that, in all honesty, I don't recall anything. At the University of Illinois, I don't really recall anything. My guess is that there was probably, some kind of a talk or a symposium, maybe in a department, maybe in a school, some remembrance of it, but it was not a university-wide sort of memorial event the way we do here at Hofstra. And so when I arrived here last year as the new president, and this was something that happened, pretty soon after I got here, it really brought home to me the effects that 9/11 had directly on Hofstra and surely on all of the New York regional schools that I really didn't see in the two places that I was since 9/11.
Now, you mentioned the ceremony that Hofstra has held for the past several years. What does that event mean to you? I remember seeing you last year up there. What does talking about the lives of the 27 members of the community that were lost, how does that impact you?
Well, as I said, it really brought home to me the deeply personal effect that this had on Hofstra, and again continues to have on the population in this region. And I think it's a really beautiful thing that we do it, and that we have some of the families of those Hofstra alumni and student come to the event. And I think it's very important, just with this interview as well, that we do bring this back every year, and that we continue to think about it and its aftermath, and what it means to people in New York, maybe personally or as a state or a region, but also to the United States in general, and what have we learned from it.
21 years later, what do you feel is the biggest impact of the events of September 11th, both locally in New York as well as in the United States?
Well, I think one of the big impacts to the United States, and certainly New York and D.C. and Pennsylvania, is that, we're not as isolated as we thought we were, right? That was the first real attack on the mainland, anyway, if you don't count Pearl Harbor, of the United States, really ever, of that significance. Again, the Civil War aside, right? The revolution, but really from abroad. And it introduced the United States to foreign terrorism, which we also had really not experienced in that kind of a way ever. And so I think that great sense of vulnerability that it created, that the United States had never really had before, brought us as a country, on the one hand, very much together at the time. There was amazing unity after that, which unfortunately got lost. But it also brought us into some wars that also did not go very well, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we reacted to it in a way that, with hindsight, and we did not have hindsight, we were really, as I said, all in shock, we might have done differently.
In the following years after the attacks, as well as days, weeks after, we saw a rise in xenophobia and Islamophobia. You were at the University of Nebraska at the time. Did you see that occur in your classes and around campus?
No, I don't know that I saw it occur in my classes, but it was certainly a live issue on our campus in Nebraska. Nebraska is more diverse than one might think without knowing anything about it. It's actually a refugee resettlement city. And so when refugees come into the United States, no matter where they're from, they often get sent to Lincoln, as well as other similar-sized cities that have offered to receive refugees and immigrants. And so Lincoln is in some ways, a very diverse place, particularly in the high schools. My daughters went to high school at a school that the students spoke like 35 different languages. There were girls in the school wearing burqas. There were some minority students who were in the minority from Thailand that were refugees. It was a very interesting place. And so this was a very live issue in Lincoln. I can't say I saw it in my classes or even really in the law school, but it was out there.
Now, are there any ways you have seen education change as a result of the attacks, whether it be as a professor or as a university president?
Well, I've only been a university president for a year. And I think that there are so many issues now that we have to think about, that I have to think about in my job. And, probably international terrorism is not as high on the list as some other things like mental health, like domestic terrorism, like other issues. As far as education goes, this, the study of this kind of terrorism is now in most universities. It's become a whole field of study. And of course, international terrorism has existed for a very, very long time. But I think the American universities got more interested in it probably after the attacks.
Out of curiosity, do you think that's a positive development or not so much?
Well, I'm in the business of knowledge creation and exploration, so it's always a good thing if we're learning more and studying more areas of life.
We have the remembrance ceremony coming up. We're doing this interview on Thursday. The remembrance ceremony is tomorrow. Are there any other ways you believe that individuals should go about remembering the Hofstra community whose lives were lost, 27 of which lives were lost on September 11th? Or, yeah.
Well, we have the remembrance ceremony, and we remember those individuals, and there's a monument there at the site where we do this. But we also have scholarships in their names, and that is a way of honoring them in perpetuity, that those scholarships go to current students, and that helps us to teach those current students, and university as a whole, certainly through this ceremony tomorrow, about what happened and about its effect on Hofstra and our community. So if, one way to honor them is to continue to support those scholarships and in their name, so that we make sure that they're there forever.
A thank you to all the individuals featured in this broadcast for taking the time to speak to us, and thank you all for listening to this show to remember the attacks of 9/11 21 years later. Before we conclude, we want to read the names of the 27 members of the Hofstra community who lost their lives on September 11th. The names are as follows: Kenneth Caldwell, Jason Kafalu, Joni Sesta, Susan Marie Klein, Jeffrey Dingle, Kevin W. Donnelly, Andrew Fisher, Richard P. Fitzsimmons, Joseph Hunter, Douglas G. Karpoloff, Joseph A. Kelly, Alicia Levin, Neil Levin,
Noel C. Mars, Edward J. Mardovich, Justin McCarthy, Alok Mehta, Bernard Patterson, Edward J. Parada, Adam Ruhalter, Andrew J. Stern, Frederick T. Verace, Joshua Vitale, Courtney Wolcott, Glenn E. Wilkinson, Glenn J. Winook, and Julie Lynn Zipper. For this special broadcast, I'm Yao Bonsu.
And I'm Michael Richardson. A thank you to everyone involved in making this show possible.